somebody, strung together examples of him saying the N-word and unearthed jokes that that make him look racist. Obviously, these are propaganda videos engineered to make him look as racist as possible by lifting something out of context. Still, they look bad. And basically, it's just, people want his head. People want his head on a stick. And I am very against cancel culture. I think the way to engage people is to criticize the misinformation that they've that they believe. I think Joe Rogan is an extraordinarily open-minded person. He has a relationship to correcting errors and apologizing that almost no one else at his level of media has, right? He's a person that can say, I got it wrong, and does this often in a way that is really credible and honest and really admirable, because he's such a genuine person. He has such a relationship to his audience where they know he means exactly what he says, which you can't say of any of the cable news people that are reaching probably fewer people than he is. And because he has such a good relationship to the truth, even when he gets stuff wrong, it's insane to people to me that people are holding him to a totally separate standard that they would hold, a cable news show, all of which have also spread misinformation to varying degrees throughout the pandemic, right? Tucker Carlson says some bullshit or Don Lemon says some bullshit. They don't have to worry that their show is going to be taken off the network, right? Whereas Joe Rogan, because he signed this deal with Spotify partly, and because he's, frankly, a lot of people in the mainstream media, I think, are envious and competitive of the amount of people he reaches. And then a lot of people that don't like the fact that he's not completely left-wing, obviously. He gets hate from the mainstream media who don't really defend him as like a fellow ally, as someone we want to protect because he's doing what we do. And then he gets hate, obviously, from the cancel culture left because he's not left. And I think it's really dangerous. I think we have to hold the line for people like Joe Rogan, or else we lose the norm of free speech. And I know the second you say free speech, people are going to say this is not relevant to the First Amendment. The government isn't trying to censor him. Yes, but the reason the First Amendment makes sense is because of this wider point that free speech is a very good thing for society. Open discourse as a general cultural value is an important thing for society. And that means free speech for speech you don't always like. And I think that's very important.
What do you think about some of the more right-wing commentators online that have been saying, don't back down, don't apologize for anything, this is not the way to play the game?
So they would be right for a lot of people. These days it does not make sense for a politician to apologize. No one believes it. Biden apologizes, no one believes it. Trump apologizes, well, he never apologizes. But if he did, no one would believe it because, imagine Hillary Clinton apologizing. Does anyone in the world go, oh my God, that's amazing that she can see that she's evolved so much as a person? No, it's so clearly scripted, right? And frankly, I think any apology from normal media figures is going to seem scripted. The difference with Joe Rogan is this is the Joe Rogan effect, right? His apologies are real. You can just hear it. You can see that he really thinks he should have had more people on from a pro-vax perspective. He is doing his best, and his apologies are he's one of the only people at his level of media reach that can apologize in a way that does not seem scripted and seems credible. And as a human being, I think the ability to apologize is extremely important. And that holds for your friends, that holds for your relationships, and it should hold if you have a really honest relationship with your audience, with which Joe Rogan does to an exceptional degree. So I disagree with those. I think his apology came across extremely well.
I think that there's definitely a different element to when Joe apologizes versus when other people do it. I think the concern from people on the right is that by apologizing, you lend credence or legitimacy to people that want to censor free speech, right? But Joe is doing his apology in a very different sort of way because of the level of intimacy that he has between himself and his audience and the amount of trust. The thing that I think that's interesting is usually when the mainstream media try to attack somebody with clips, whether that be from the first phase of this campaign or the second phase of this campaign around COVID versus the clips of him saying the N-word, I think that the problem that they have, most of the time, the press are trying to show you a small microcosm of someone that they claim is indicative of the remainder of their character, right? Here is the tip of the iceberg that shows that this person is the racist, homophobic, xenophobic, whatever, that we always knew that he is, and here's the proof. This is the cracks showing in his persona, and this is the actual true Joe coming through. You just didn't happen to know about it. The problem that you have is that the vast majority of people, even people who are super duper casual fans of Rogan, have probably listened to at least 100, 200, 300 hours. And the normal fans of him, you're talking upwards of 1,000 hours easily that someone can have consumed Joe Rogan's content. They go, well, hang on a second. I can't take, this is the tip of the iceberg
I've
from
already
you.
seen the whole iceberg.
Precisely. I have such a depth of connection with this guy.
I've seen the tip and the base.
Correct.
That sounded really weird.
Do not say that again.
Pause.
The tip and the base of Joe. But yeah, that's it. That's what they're trying to do. They're trying to use this old media narrative of here is the small segment that represents the bigger version, but they can't do that. They can't do that anymore.
Yeah, so you raise a really interesting point, and I think it's true. What separates this cancellation from most other cancellations is that they're not unearthing anything. There's nothing. We all know exactly who Joe Rogan has been for years now because he has 4-hour conversations every day that are completely unfiltered, where he says exactly what he thinks, right? All the evidence of him being a bad person, if such evidence exists, it's already in the open, right? There's nothing to discover. If you hate him based on who he actually is by now. But so compare that to like a different kind of a cancellation. You know, generally it's like finding something no one knew about, right? It's like we found this blog from 15 years ago where Joy Reid from MSNBC said that, you know, all gay men like underage boys, right? That's a true story that happened. People don't really talk about it because since Joy Reid is a darling of the left, she is somehow immune to the logic of cancellation. Even though if Joe Rogan had done the same thing, people would be foaming at the mouth about it, which again, as a sidebar, shows you how these sort of cultural rules are used as basically totally arbitrary rules to fuck over people you don't like, and you suddenly stop caring about them when it's something you like. That should tell you everything you need to know about these cancellations for things you said 20 years ago. I mean, someone unearthed something of Neil Young saying something like pretty, I think it was kind of pro-Nazi. I might have to fact check that, but he said something really cancelable in like the 80s or 90s, and then he walked it back. But, you know, that's usually how cancellations work. It's like this thing, oh, you didn't know Roald Dahl said basically justified the Holocaust, right? And now you know, and it makes you think about Matilda differently. Okay, that's usually how it works. Even in those cases, if a person has disavowed their views, I'm really against canceling them because people change so much over the course of their lives. The difference with Joe is that that's not what's happening here. It's like they're just stitching together non-representative, out of context bits from a long career and playing them back to back as if all he's been doing for the past 20 years is saying the N-word.
Do you know where that supercut originally came from?
Where?
Alex Jones made it.
No way.
Alex Jones made it.
Why?
Do you remember when him and Rogan had that beef?
No.
Okay, so him and Rogan had a fallout a little while ago. It was like semi-public. It was before Spotify. Maybe, I want to say 4 or 5 years ago. And this was Alex throwing a little bit of shade around in an original version of this video. Now, I might have been sold a lie by the version of the video that I've seen. And if that's the case, then sorry, Alex. But I've heard from a bunch of different sources that the original video was from Alex Jones. And if you actually look at the first version, it's got InfoWars graphics on it. And this was him throwing that around. So the interesting thing, I'd seen this video a bunch of times. It's been floating around Twitter for quite a while, and I've seen it do the rounds a fair bit. But there's equivalent versions of this for the Young Turks. There's a huge one of them floating around at the moment that's got 1.5 million plays on it. They're just same thing, out of context, N-word, 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 N-word. There's Ethan Klein, when he deleted some of Jordan Peterson's episodes with him a couple of weeks ago, he said both the N-word and the F-word back to back over and over again. Did it. I really love saying did it. And you're like, okay. But then the supercut of Joe, for whatever reason, decides to really, really get a lot of momentum and gravitas now. One of the things that I definitely don't think is true, that I've seen in a bunch of different group chats I'm in, is that this is part of some overarching conspiracy. There's some company, the one that's behind Patriot Takes, which is the Twitter account that did it, they're in support of some other super PAC organization that is linked with blah, blah, blah. And Stool Presidente, who's the guy that owns Barstool Sports? Dude that owns Barstool Sports went on...
Yeah, I know who you're talking about.
Went on a live stream podcast with the guys that own that company that is associated with this, and he's going backward and forward. I don't think you need to look to conspiracy to see why these two things happened in sequence with each other, especially if, as I said, this video's been floating around for a long time and it wasn't created by somebody. I think that you've primed the cultural algorithm with Joe Rogan's done something wrong and he's done an apology video. And then people have taken this opportunity to go, right, okay, now I'm going to try and throw... Yeah, precisely. What have we got? Yep. What else can we throw at him? There's videos floating around of other stuff as well. Are you not going to... Everyone's talking about Joe Rogan's racism, but what about his misogyny? Here he is laughing at one of his comedian friends saying that he used to get sucked off in the back room of the Comedy Store. And it's just, what can you find over a 12...
How dare he?
Yeah, I know. Over a 12 or 15-year career of having whatever... 10 hours of conversations a week, like 2,000 podcast episodes. But it's hard. It's hard to say. It's not the individual words in context, the way that you do that. It's not forgivable, or at least it shouldn't be like something that we support. But as somebody that puts out an awful lot of content, I know that as your volume increases, you're going to say dumb stuff over and over and over again. And over a long enough period of time, there's going to be a lot of dumb stuff. And that's how you make like a huge supercut.
Especially if you're a comedian that's often having other comedians on your podcast, drinking, smoking weed on your podcast. It's an informal conversation. They're not putting together, 99 theses of like what they think about the world all the time. A lot of times they're fucking around. That's why people like it. Listen, I think we have to also talk about the issue of whether it is in all cases immoral or unethical to say the N-word, right? People are, I think, pretending not to understand the difference between mentioning a word in quotations and directing a slur at somebody, right? With malicious intent. Those are two very different things, and it's two very different people that do either one of those. And I think people are disingenuously pretending not to know the difference between those two things, pretending not to be able to observe the difference. And, it's so interesting. I finally watched the O.J. Simpson documentary last week. And there's this moment in the O.J. Simpson trial where there's this huge fight over whether they can admit Mark Furman's N-word tape, right? This cop that found the glove at the scene had a history of saying the N-word. The OJ's defense said, we want the jury to hear him say the N-word so that they don't trust his testimony, right? And the prosecution said, we don't want them to hear the N-word, right? It's going to bias their judgment. And there was this argument about it. And the prosecution says, essentially to the judge, when black people hear the N-word, they cannot remain objective. It's too emotional. It's too hard-hitting. There's no black juror can remain objective after hearing that word, and jurors need to remain objective. Okay. Then OJ's defense comes back and says, how dare you say black people can't remain unbiased after hearing the N-word? How dare you? It's racist. It's patronizing. It's condescending. And they were widely thought to have won that particular argument, right? Back in the 90s, the version of 90s woke that obtained during the OJ trial said, of course, black people can hear the N-word in certain contexts and understand it and remain objective, right? Remain unbiased, remain rational. What I find interesting now is that people are implicitly making the argument of the prosecution now as woke, which is that if black people hear the N-word, it hurts too much. We can't possibly remain rational enough to observe the difference between someone mentioning it in quotation marks and somebody directing it as a slur. Of course people can. And I think, this is where the cynicism comes into this. It's like the notion of black people taking offense at Rogan saying this word is, I think, being used cynically to take him down.
Do you not think that any black people have taken offense at it?
Oh, sure. I definitely think some black people have taken offense at it. Probably black people that are less familiar with him, right? Like if this goes back to the iceberg question. If this is the tip of the iceberg that you're seeing Joe Rogan about, you're going to think he's a racist. He made a joke about going to a black neighborhood and it seeming like Planet of the Apes, right? And then it's just like N-word, N-word, N-word. So if that's the tip of the iceberg, you are rationally going to think, wow, this guy has just been like foaming at the mouth with racism for years. And that it makes perfect sense to take offense to that as a black person or as any person. If you're familiar with much more of the iceberg, as a lot of people probably are, and Joe Rogan has a lot of black fans, I don't think they're taking offense. Because they know his general character so well at this point. They're not getting new data about his character, right? They know he's a comedian that says every curse word, makes fun of every group. So like imagine this is very interesting. Imagine you had never seen the show South Park. And it's gone over 20 seasons, right? Similar to Joe Rogan in that they have a shit ton of material. And you stitch together every joke at black people's expense ever made on the show South Park. And you have no other familiarity with it. You are going to come away thinking, how the fuck is this on TV? Is this show from the fucking Jim Crow South? Like, my God. Now, of course, the rest of us that have watched a lot of South Park, we understand they make fun of everyone. They make fun of everyone, right? We've seen the whole iceberg. That's what's happening to Joe Rogan right now. So, yeah, I assume a lot of black people, to the extent they're seeing a small sliver of what he's done, are taking offense. But again, it is propaganda. This is the definition of propaganda. And I think that should be more widely understood.
What's happening, people? If you enjoyed that, then press here for the full, unedited episode. And don't forget to subscribe. Peace.